Great, and now this webinar is being recorded. So we'll be able to share this recording with all the members and those who are not able to join us today. And all presentations will be held in English. However, we have the captions enabled, and you can use that for the language captioning. So for this webinar, we are on Zoom webinar function where all attendees are muted. So if you have a question, we encourage you to type it on the Q&A function or raise hand so that you can be able to ask your question live on air during the Q&A slot at the end. And we'll be using the Zoom chat for all the communications and introductions. Therefore, on the chat, you can be able to type your name and organization if you came in a little bit late. So I'll be showing you how to locate some of the Zoom functions. So the chat, it's at the bottom row of your screen. Then we have the Q&A where we'll be typing all the questions so that the panelists and the speakers will be able to answer that during the Q&A sessions, or they'll be able to type them as we go along. Then for language captioning, if you would like to see the captions in a different language, you can use the language captioning and enable it to the language of your preference. Lastly, but not the least, you will be able to see the resources button. The resources button, it's where we have links to the toolbox as well as to the network sign up, and also to view the bios of all our speakers today. So make sure you locate these functions as we'll be using them for engagement and interaction during this webinar. So in case you are new and you would like to review previous webinars and newsletters, you can always visit the toolbox.org, our resident watersheds toolbox.org. And in these, you'll be able to see all the trainings, webinars, and other resources that we have for the network members. So we'll be putting that link on the chat in a few. And now, for today, this is what we have for you all. So we'll be hearing from 6 speakers, where the first speaker will be sharing the new enabling conditions report that is expected to be launched in July of this year. And then after that, we'll be hearing from 5 case studies from Ecuador, Colorado, Brazil, South Africa, and Kenya on different policy measures that the team has been working on with governments and communities, as well as with other entities to support conservation efforts. So with these, we have the 6 speakers, and to access the speakers' bios, you can go to the resources button, and you can be able to see the speakers. However, I encourage every speaker to spend 30 to 1 minute, just briefly reminding you all who they are. And with this, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Nancy Riley. Nancy is our Resilient Watersheds Program Coordinator here at the Nature Conservancy, and she will be sharing with us about the upcoming report on enabling conditions report. So Nancy, welcome. Let me know if you need me to share your screen, or you'll be able to share yours.
Thanks, Florence. Would you mind just keeping the slides going for me?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Lilly, and I have been honored for the past 3 years to work at the Nature Conservancy on the Resilient Watershed strategy at the global level. As you can tell by this picture of me on my local river, I love spending time in and around freshwater ecosystems and trying to understand the complex rules that govern them. Today, I'm going to be talking about why the Nature Conservancy works on policy. Just similarly to our complex ecosystems, we have created complex systems of policy, regulation, and legislation around the world, which outline the rules under which we operate. I'll also be speaking about an upcoming report, and a very thrilling report, depending on who you are, which is set to launch in July. And I'll give you a glimpse into some of the details in findings from that report, including a brief case study, which we'll dive more into with the next speaker. Next slide. Dual crises are threatening our freshwater ecosystems. And let's be clear that that's what we're talking about today, the systems upon which we all depend. By this year, 75% of the world's population will have been affected by drought in some capacity, and climate change is continuously disproportionately impacting our fragile freshwater systems, exacerbating biodiversity loss and water scarcity. Next. However, many of our source watersheds, where we get our water from, are also home to 50% of imperiled terrestrial species and 60% of freshwater fish. Conserving these systems are a win-win for people and nature. So this is an opportunity for practitioners, governments, and water and sanitation providers to invest in perpetually sustainable operations. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Florence. When I think about policy, regulations, and law, I think about systems in the context laid out by Donella Meadows, a leading systems thinking scholar. Systems are created to reach goals, but along the way, there are leverage points for change. This diagram shows the influence or potential of each point, with those on the right side being the most influential. Yeah. Policy and regulation and law. Oh, go back one. Thanks, Florence. Policy, regulation, and law tend to sit at the bottom of the top 5 in social system and structure. So we're talking about the rules, structure, and goals of the system. So while they're not the most influential way to change a system, they define the boundaries within which the system operates. So they are pretty powerful. Next slide. Unfortunately, my perspective of systems thinking and the danger of working at a level so far away from actual boots on the ground work can be metaphorically demonstrated by this fantastic drawing of a horse. Global goals and targets like the Global Biodiversity Framework and Sustainable Development Goals are argued about, quantified, and decided in conference rooms in large cities, and then supposed to filter down through federal, state, and local levels of government, eventually touching down on the ground and delivering pristine outcomes. Reality can look quite different. Local programs can quickly find themselves weighed down under the burden of high expectations without proper resourcing or support. Rather than this being a reflection of the potential of NBS on the ground, it's instead representative of the way we might speak about NBS potential without the proper context for what it takes to create meaningful outcomes. Next slide. With this in mind, we set about assessing what enabling conditions might look like in practice. We started with 17 case studies within a diversity of phases and scales from countries around the globe, identified by a scoping study. Across the study, we interviewed 75 experts and did deep desktop reviews and research, going all the way back to primary sources like country-level constitutions. Then we developed a report including key lessons found repetitively in the case studies and an analytical framework, which we'll dive into in the next slide. The framework is set up so that a project might be able to run an analysis to understand their enabling conditions and context. So we start with policy design conditions, the paperwork or the rules for a project. Legislation serves as the house or roof under which policy and regulation operate. Often legislation is the most difficult to change. And all 3 of these rules influence project financing and funding and how institutions operate. Once you understand that, these are all then subject to common executing conditions, including social acceptance of nature-based solutions or the ability of an organization to innovate. Let me go back just for 1 second. Thank you. Finally, we reach NBS implementation on the ground. And ideally, if this is successful, that information is flowing back, creating demand for more nature-based solutions and watershed conservation, as well as learnings and advocacy influencing legislation, policies, and regulation and improving them. Next, thank you. So from this massive report, we found three key messages or 3 C's for unlocking nature-based solution implementation for watershed conservation: coherence, context, and cooperation. Policies and laws and regulations must coordinate and not contradict each other. And then these are, again, subject to the context. Even the best policies will fail if the right executing conditions aren't present. Finally, most of the case studies in our report, and as you'll hear later in our presentation today, are still successful in imperfect systems where players are willing to cooperate in different and creative ways. So just quickly, I'm going to share what our case study from Brazil looks like. Every single one of our case studies has a diagram like this, where we looked at what the explicit and intended enabling conditions might be, what might be inhibiting them, and what is not intended that could have the same effect on either side. But for the purpose of this one, we're going to ignore the inhibiting side. So next slide, Florence. We're going to look at some coherence within the Brazil case study. So on the enabling side, you have water law and regulatory agencies with enabling conditions at the legislative and policy and regulation level. So in that house, these rules are cooperating or are coherent. They're working together. Next slide. And then you have context. Oh, we go back to, please. Thank you. To the context. Perfect. Oh, they all look the same. Anyways, as we walk through these, one more, Florence, there, perfect. We have institutional arrangements, common executing conditions, and legislation that all enable the NBS implementation on the ground. And finally, you'll also see some of these conditions with the cooperation, they're cooperating together and enable cooperation, including multi-stakeholder models, project management units that have defined roles. You can go to the last slide, Florence. Yeah, so here you'll also see in the finance, finance section, you have multiple source of financing. So you have a lot of different people and players working together to implement nature-based solutions for watershed conservation. And Claudio will be best suited to answer more of these questions. Plus, we're going to get to learn quite a bit more about this project, his project in particular, or the project in Brazil. So next slide, please, Florence. This report is launching in July. You can keep an eye out in the Resilient Watersheds or International Water Association newsletters. And I want to take a quick moment to thank our many, many partners, many of which are also not named on this slide, but those include CWE, IVL, ARUP, and AFD.
Amazing. Thank you, Nancy. We are all looking forward to the launch of the report. So we'll go ahead now to the case studies. And our first case study is on subnational policy, subnational water tariff. This is in Brazil, where they are trying to mobilize resources for NBS. Claudio will be our speaker, and Claudio is the water policy specialist in Brazil. Claudio, let me know if you would like me to help with the screen sharing.
Yes, Florence, please. Do you hear me well?
Yes. So I'll sharing my screen.
Well, thank you everybody for joining this webinar. I believe Nancy gave a brilliant introduction to this subject. And now I'm going to bring to you a little bit of the head size of the horse that Nancy showed on the global ambition local delivery slide, which I thought was amazing, very realistic. Well, first of all, I brought you this this graph that I think it speaks very much for our local experience implementing watershed investment programs on the ground. And I want to remind everybody that when we plan to implement such projects, this what you've seen here is the general cost composition that will apply to pretty much everywhere. So we can split it in this early stages, which in the resilient watershed toolbox is stated as the pre-feasibility, the feasibility, and the design stages, where you can see on this graph, it is where the larger, the bulker investments are. And then after, when we evolve a project to a maturity state, there is a lags phase that ideally spreads forever for a successful project that will remain with this this permanent costs. So when we think about the cost composition and the financial structure of a project, we have to think very much about this. And there's another important detail in this graph, which is the red line, which is the ecosystem delivery, the effective ecosystem delivery timing. So when we talk about policy and designing such projects, sometimes it's I won't say it's easy because it's not that easy. And the first stage is to gather people around, to gather institutions, to mobilize everybody, and even to raise funds to cope with the implementation, the first stages. But then comes the more difficult part, which is to keep investment, to keep these projects alive for time enough for the ecosystem ecosystem services to be delivered, and that's where policy comes in place. So next. Florence, please. So welcome to Brazil. Brazil is a large country, the fifth largest country in the world. It's equivalent to the size of US, Canada, and the whole sub-Saharan Africa. So it's 27 states, 5 major biomes. You can click on the next, Florence, please. And this country is composed of more than 8,000 municipalities. And the case I bring for us to study here is how we create financial mechanisms for sanitation and water and sanitation projects to invest in watershed conservation and the supply and watershed conservation. I emphasize that because here in Brazil, the water supply and sanitation services, they are the remit of these municipalities. Next one, please. And you can click one more, Florence. When we speak about nature-based solutions, thinking on water services, this concept will not be applicable in the whole country. So all the Amazon that's so known worldwide, it's not about this part of the country we are talking about. We're talking about this mostly the south eastern part of Brazil that has been devastated like more than a century ago, and where there is this composition of mid and big cities surrounded by rural areas, and there is this composition of city dwellers having the paying capacity and rural landowners that are open to be compensated for protecting hydrological sensitive areas in their properties. By the way, in this part of the country, the majority of land is private property. So whatever intervention we think in terms of nature-based solutions has to be negotiated with these landowners. Next, Florence. So about the policy structure regarding water and sanitation sector in Brazil, this is very similar to other countries too. So as water and sanitation are public services that many times handed out for private or even public companies to be run, these services are subjected to a regulatory system. So here in Brazil, we have a national level of regulation, which is the National Water and Sanitation Agency. It issues only general reference norms for state and subnational regulatory agencies to follow. And it was this agency that created the Water Producer Program, which has been very successful, where TNC has joined with the concept of the water funds, and we have created quite some good projects. Then at the state level, there's 27 states, we have state regulatory agency or sometimes municipal regulatory agency. Those are the ones that define specific technical and financial regulations for the utilities to follow. And these assure quality of the service at the lowest fare, and also assure the fair economic balance of these utilities. And then at the municipal level, there are the utilities that effectively operate the water and sanitation services. Next one. So our struggle during the last few years here in Brazil was to convince the players in the sector to incorporate part of these investments into the water tariff. And then I'm referring specifically to this the right side of the graph I showed earlier, because we need such kind of funding, such stable funding to keep these projects going for years over years for us to get the ecosystem service delivered. We have been working mostly on three places in Brazil, which is three states: the Federal District, Minas Gerais State, and Santa Catarina State. Next one. So in Santa Catarina State, which is the first place where we have been successful in incorporating watershed investment costs into the water tariff structure, this initiative has been originally influenced by the Federal Water Producer Program created by the National Water Agency, has gained a lot of support from this resilient watershed network at the feasibility phase. There's one project that's been very successful in the state. It's a small watershed, encompasses 2 municipalities and 1 water utility. But it is ongoing since today. It has more than 10 years now. So it's a small but very successful project. In this case, the regulatory agency allowed a cap of 3% of the revenues of the water utility to be invested in nature-based solutions. So it's a tiny, steady investment since 2009 that's keeping this project process going. Next. Second case is the case of Federal District, which was also influenced by the National Water Agency and the Water Producer Program. 1.8 billion have been invested since 2012, had also gained support from the Resilient Watershed Network, and has incorporated water tariff in the water tariff structure, has incorporated nature-based solutions in 2002. So in that case, it's 2% of the water tariff revenues that go specifically for the payments for environmental services, which is one financial mechanism that keeps those landowners, those private landowners, engaged in the process. And then concluding, next one, Florence. In the case of Minas Gerais State, this has been led by the state water utility. TNC has not been involved since the beginning of this project, but it's a much more ambitious project. It focuses on this big state. It reaches 288 municipalities. It's been 15 million invested since the beginning, and 0.5% of the water tariff revenue goes to nature-based solutions. So it's a bigger, much larger program, and you can imagine, you can suspect that implementation sometimes goes not so well. And it's exactly at this point that TNC is joining Minas Gerais State now to reassess the Pro-Mananciais program and make it work better. Well, much of these stories and the background studies that have supported this case, they are registered in these three publications that you can access in the Resilient Watershed repository. And well, I'm stopping now and hope I can bring some other explanations on the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio, for the great presentation. So if you have questions for Claudio or for Nancy, who was our first speaker, please type them on the Q&A button, and we'll be able to answer them at the end during the Q&A session. So with that, I will welcome our next speaker, who is Celine Hawkins. Celine is the Colorado River Tribal Water Partnership Program Director, and she will be sharing with us about the tribal nation-state negotiation and engagement and the process and the lessons they have learned. So I'll share my screen for you, Celine.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks. And you can go to the next slide. So I'm joining you all today from Durango, Colorado, which is in the headwaters of the Colorado River Basin. And this is a basin that has experienced more than 20 years of drought, and we're grappling with a water crisis that is affecting 40 million people, 7 states in the United States, 2 countries, and 30 tribal nations. And living here in the headwaters this winter and seeing a really hot and dry winter and an anticipated really low spring runoff into our rivers, I've had a lot of anxiety, particularly around wildfire risk in my communities. And so what gives me hope and what I'm going to talk to you about today is a project that we've worked on for several years at the Nature Conservancy, where we're implementing a really innovative and first of its kind project. It's a water sharing agreement between a tribal nation, the Hickory Apache Nation, the state of New Mexico, with support from the Nature Conservancy as a partner. We have demonstrated through this project and its implementation in the last couple of years that we can actually increase flows in the river at times that matter for the recovery of endangered fish in the river, the ecology of the river, and to support water security in a basin that is in the bullseye of climate change. This project has pretty serious localized benefit that includes economic benefit for the tribal nation, environmental benefits, and water security for the state of New Mexico. But it also has really wide regional impact as a demonstration project of how we're going to manage the Colorado River Basin into the future. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Colorado River Basin, and then I'll tell you how we built this project. So next slide, please. So restoring flows in the Colorado River Basin is really hard work. And we're seeing rivers that are drying up, like you see on the right side of the slide. We're seeing, really big impacts on recreation and management in this basin. So when we're restoring flows in the Colorado River Basin, we're looking at putting water in rivers at the right time in the right amounts. And this is really critical for both people and nature, being able to live in a basin where we're expecting water to supply to potentially decrease another 20%. So flow, when we think about our key ecological attributes in the Colorado River Basin, what really drives this system? Flow is really the master variable in Western rivers. So when we think about how we're going to increase the resilience of the system, we really need to look at managing water in ways that we keep flows in rivers at the right time while they're on their way to serve other uses in the basin. Each drop of water in the Colorado River Basin is used somewhere between 15 and 20 times on its way from the headwaters to the bottom of the system. So we really have to think about creative ways to use water along its way. Next slide, please. So in this big Colorado River Basin, we're already using more than Mother Nature provides. The supply has been dropping during the last 20 years of drought. And so on top of that, we have 30 tribal nations in the Colorado River Basin. You can see the map of approximately where their lands are today. And they have legal rights to somewhere between 20 and 30% of the water in the system. However, because of the way that tribal water rights are decreed or settled in the United States, large portions of these supplies have not been put to use. So even though we sort of already have a math problem in the basin where we're sort of using more than Mother Nature provides, we have a lot of tribal water rights that are set to be developed in this system. And this has really challenged legal and policy frameworks that are in the process of adapting to a drier future. So we're in a water scarce area, and the role of tribal water has not fully been reckoned with, which sort of set us up for doing the project that I'm going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So for the past about 10 years, tribal nations have really been working collectively to get a seat at the policy negotiation table and to importantly be part of the solution in the Colorado River Basin. So as we have a basin that's grappling with drought, that has a huge policy negotiation, tribal nations both have a lot to lose in the process and are showing up with some of the most innovative solutions. And so next slide, please. That gets us to how we built this project. So again, the project that I'm talking about is a 10-year water sharing agreement between the Hickory Apache Nation, the state of New Mexico, and the Nature Conservancy. And the success of this project is really due to a couple of things: a strong foundation of relationships between partners that had not worked together before, and a process of mutual and collective visioning and goal setting that set the project up for success. So in the United States, and in particular in the Colorado River Basin, state governments and tribal nations do not have a very long history of working together in the water space, particularly on governance and decisions about sort of management at the basin-wide scale. We have seen a rapid increase in tribal participation in governance in the basin since about 2018, but there is, where the relationships are new. Tribal nations are still navigating complex relationships between federal and state agencies, and states really lead negotiations and governance decisions in the Colorado River Basin. So the Nature Conservancy had strong relationships with both the state of New Mexico and the Hickory Apache Nation. And we were invited in to help think about a project to help transition the nation's water from a prior leasing arrangement, which was primarily to support coal-fired power plants in this river basin that have since shut down, at least in part. And so really the first task of working on this project was to really build strong relationships across that sort of state and tribal government with support of the Nature Conservancy. And a big part of the early part of this project was making sure that we had done some collective visioning around the project. We were working in a basin where we had never seen a water transaction, and particularly any environmental water transactions before. The state of New Mexico had a really innovative tool that we ended up using to implement the project called the Strategic Water Reserve. It allows using water for both compact compliance and ecological purposes, but that tool had never been approved for use in this part of the state of New Mexico. And so it really took some conversations and collective visioning around what might be possible if we were to work together. And for me, when I think about that time, it was really apparent that the state, the nation, and the Nature Conservancy were all positioned very differently within the complex governance negotiations and management of the Colorado River Basin. And that actually became a strength of the project because there were things that we could do together with all of our skills, talents, and relevant government authorities that none of the entities could do alone. So we ended up, through that collective visioning process, building a project where tribal water was leased to a state entity. The state entity was the only entity that could use that innovative tool, the Strategic Water Reserve, and where the Nature Conservancy could provide some of our core competencies around project management, freshwater science, and fundraising to make sure that we could implement a project of this magnitude and scale. And we anticipate putting somewhere around 6 billion gallons of water into the San Juan River every year for 10 years. So it's a large, large project. Next slide, please. I also want to talk about our broader stakeholder and rights holder and community engagement in the San Juan River Basin. So you can see the state lines. This is called the Four Corners region because there's the four corners of the state of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. And as you might imagine looking at this map, this is a really complicated political situation here. The San Juan River Basin, like many rivers, does not flow exactly along state lines. So it flows from the headwaters in Colorado into the state of New Mexico, back into the state of Colorado, right there at the Four Corners, and into the state of Utah with tributary water coming in from Arizona and New Mexico as well. And there are 4 tribal nations that hold lands within the basin, and they collectively own about a little under 60% of the lands in the basin. So understanding how we could do restoration work and flow restoration work in this basin really required us thinking across a really complicated landscape. Luckily, the Nature Conservancy has a cross-boundary program that looks sort of at a watershed scale here, and we have strong relationships with all 4 of the tribal nations in the basin. Next slide, please. So this project, when we think about sort of the broader stakeholder and rights holder engagement, this project is a demonstration project for how tribal nations can participate and build solutions with state partners and with support from conservation organizations like the Nature Conservancy. And so during the time that we were crafting and beginning to implement this project, there was a larger conversation going on at scale in the Colorado River Basin where tribal nations and principal negotiators from the entire upper region of the Colorado River were starting to sit down and talk about how they might work together. This picture here was from a historic signing in 2024, where this group formalized working relationships between the 6 Upper Basin tribal nations and the states in the Upper Colorado River Basin. So there is a lot of implications in how we talk about this project in policy circles, but we have seen some movement and growth in terms of how tribal nations and state governments are starting to work together at the regional scale here. Next slide, please. And we also do quite a bit of community engagement. There is an endangered fish recovery program that helps organize a pretty wide group of water users and stakeholders in the Colorado River Basin. We now, associated with this project, have work with that recovery program, including the 4 tribal nations that we just saw on the map. We have done raft trips on the San Juan River. This is a picture of TNC staff in one of those trips a couple of years ago. We are doing outreach and communications work with the Hickory Apache Nation's Water Commission, and doing other work in support of stewardship of tribal lands. So in addition to the relationships that we built between the project partners, we're doing a lot of community engagement and talking about the project and how we're restoring flows and the benefits and the monitoring and adaptive management in many different forums at this point. Next slide, please. So at a time when institutions in the Colorado River Basin are really struggling to adapt and sort of flex our water policies to meet the moment and to negotiate a set of policy frameworks to take us into the future, it's been really important for us to be doing innovative on-the-ground projects to test how we're going to manage water into the future. So I'm really proud of the way that the Nature Conservancy, our state partner at New Mexico, and our tribal nation partner were able to come together. And now we work on everything from project implementation to joint technical teams monitoring, but we also are in lockstep on our communications and outreach about the project. So we're hoping that this project is a blueprint for other water sharing agreements and other tribally led solutions in the Colorado River Basin. And I think this is going to be really important in how we work on nature-based solutions at scale in the region. Thank you so much, and I look forward to taking questions later.
Thank you, Celine, for that presentation. So we have 3 more case studies to be shared, and you might have realized that we skipped one of our speakers. We're struggling with internet. We hope he'll be able to join us in time. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Giselle. Giselle Ohenda is our policy specialist from Ecuador. And Giselle will be sharing about the Ecuador's water protected areas and their implementation. Giselle, let me know if you would prefer if I can share the slides, the screen for you.
Yeah, please, Florence. Thank you.
Then, Annette.
I can see the slides. Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. So perfect. Thank you. So today I will be sharing a quick overview of the current status, progress and challenge of the work that we are doing in Ecuador to strengthen the conservation of water through a legal figure called water protection areas. In the case of Ecuador, the water protection areas were established by the 2014 inorganic law or water resources. They are designed to protect strategic water sources, especially with 2 main objectives, those that supply water for human consumption, and the second is for food sovereignty in the main area for these water protection areas. According to the law, in the context principle to the Article 78 defines water protection areas as territories with water sources of public interest for conservation, and the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador recognizes also the right to water as a human right and established the protection of water resources as a state obligation. So this is an important framework for the citizens in Ecuador. So in this context, according to the law, water protection areas should be part of the National Protected Area System, or the acronym in Spanish is SNAP, that would grant to them the highest level of the protection, meaning, for example, that extractive activities like mining will be restricted in these areas. However, the incorporation into water protection areas to SNAP hasn't happened consistently yet in this time, mainly because the environmental and the water legal frameworks aren't fully aligned. So this creates a gap between legal intent and actual implementation in the context of the water protection areas. Next slide, please. As of 2025, in this moment, we have 35 water protection areas in Ecuador, protecting nearly 296,000 hectares, which is 1.19% of the country land in the whole territory of the Ecuador. TNC, in this case, has supported the consolidation of the 5 water protection areas. These areas safeguard, for example, more than 2,300 kilometers of rivers, almost 2,800 hectares of wetlands and lakes, and provide water security to over 173,000 people. So it's a huge milestone that we have in TNC with these 5 water protection areas. So even though the figure is relatively new in Ecuador and the mechanism for conservation is already having a tangible impact on people and ecosystems, especially for freshwater ecosystems, the progress to establish a water protection area is relatively easy, and it takes around minimum 90 days once the technical and the legal requirements are in place. And you can see in the third element what is the 5 steps that we need to consider for the establish a water protection area. Next slide, please. With that said, consolidation for the water protection areas at a scale comes with key challenges. Obviously, we identified as TNC 2 main elements for the challenge. The first one is the main challenge related with the consolidation of the water protection areas, and the other is governance systems and management guidelines related with the water protection areas. The first layers is the financial, related with the financial system, sustainabilities, because many areas are established but lack funding for the implementation. We have problems with land use conflicts, the governance related with the local and regional coordination is often weak, and communities may not be fully engaged in all of the 35 water protection areas in the whole territory. And finally, we have climate change is a key challenge in the area. So for example, which is altering rainfall, affecting water flows, and this is ecosystem for the water protection areas into protected, obviously affected. But also we have other key challenge related with the legally framework site for each water protection area must have, for example, technical management plans, governance models, management committees, and financial sustainability strategy. Not all of the water protection areas have all of these management or committees in place. So TNC at this moment is supporting this process by improving the national guidelines, especially drawing from what we have learned in the field, like the case of Aguarico Chinguala Cofanes water protection area. And we are also developing a new governance guide built from that experience to help other areas create a strong and functional communities, not just on the paper, but actual operating in place. Next, please. So with this in mind, we have, as I mentioned, after we identify the key challenges in the field, we're working on the consolidation. No, the next, please. We consolidation the 5 water protection areas across different regions in the country. That's fine. Thank you. In the Ecuador region, TNC realized that there are clear gaps identified both in policy and the implementation of the water protection areas. So based on that direct experience that we developed a theory of change, focuses internally and directly on policy changes, right? So the goal is to ensure that water protection areas are not only established and say goodbye at the moment, but fully consolidated with a strong legal and financial and governance foundations. So this talk is our roadmap to make that possible, and it focuses on 5 pillars. The one is related with the legal ambiguity, because we don't have no regulation that clearly explain how water protection areas should be incorporated into the national protected area system. The level 2 reflects political uncertainty because the water law was declared unconstitutional and is still under review in the parliament. The other process in the 3rd level is about institutional change. Ecuador has gone through several changes in national leaderships and ministers in recent years that increase instability. Level 4 is focused on the consolidation that sustainable management, and we have seen that having a management committee in place is critical for the water protection areas. And here is a critical space for the water funds can play a strong role here. And the final, the level 5, is related with the governance. TNC is working with both communities and institutions to build a stronger and share governance models for the water protection areas. That is the key pillars that we build the talk. Next, please. So we identify challenges and opportunities So here you have a complete overview of the talk that we have built. It's based on that the 5 key levels that we just saw. Those emerge from the real needs that we observe on the ground while working on the field in this principle of the 5 water protection areas that we are working as TNC. But it also responds to broader public policy needs in Ecuador, especially the current gaps in regulation, implementation, and institutional coordination with the government. So this roadmap help us connect practical experience in long-term policy solutions to truly consolidate all water protection areas, not just the 5 water protection areas. Next, please. So just to here is a talk sums on the intermediate results we are working toward. It focuses in the 3 main intermediate results. The principal is a revised water law that reflects a conservation priorities in Ecuador. The second is the approval of the 2 ministerial agreements to strengthen the legal framework for the water protection areas related with the governance, management, the committees, and the financial systems or managements. And the third is the creation of the 2 new water protection areas led by water funds in the Amazon headwaters and related with the iconic place that we have in the TNC Ecuador. Each of these is granted in what we have seen on the ground, but also designed to respond to Ecuador national public policy context in line with the government. So this is really important. And all of this strategic approach is respond that what we have to 2030 goal from TNC. Next, please. So just to finalize TNC, what is the TNC works on these 5 main water protection areas and key achievements. Since 2022, we have working with MATE, the Ministry of the Environment, to support the creation of the water protection areas, the 5 water protection areas, and we have development management plans for each area and are staying involved until communities, the governance, and are in place, and the financial sustainability is secured for all of these areas. For example, in Aguarico, Chingual, and Cofanes already has an active community and on-the-ground actions. Others like Atacazo and Cuturibi water protection areas are progressing with the plans and coordination for the government's management. In Otavalo Mojanda, the other area, the plan covers 3 areas, mainly in the Otavalo Mojanda, and is in the final review with the MATE, the management plan. And in Rio Suno, we have begun restoration activities with the community. And we have activities for reviewing the management plan also with MATE. So we are also improving national guidelines to make water protection areas implementation clearly and stronger, with a focus especially on freshwater protection and governance for all of the 35 water protection areas in the country. So this is a really important work that we already have in this process. The last one, please. So just to close, here are some quick reflections. The first, to advance, TNC has helped to consolidate water protection areas and continue to support their sustainable management. Their areas are already contribute to security water for people and ecosystems. In challenge, consolidate all of the water protection areas nationwide requires ongoing collaboration and also adequate resources and a strong political and technical community. That is important. And the opportunities, there is a real potential for greater integration with other conservation areas, and also for improving governance through stronger coordination systems. And just I want to say what is looking ahead for our next steps include continued collaboration, local collaboration with the communities, and the local collaboration with the MATE, the Ministry of the Environment, increase investment, promoting innovation in water management, durable water frameworks, staying flexible because political and institution change is constant. We have a MEL plan for this context. And finally, we are pushing forward with new water protection areas proposals, like 3 new proposals. We are working on that. And we see this work as a long-term effort on that connects local realities with national policy change. So just to finalize, I want to wrap up. Water protection areas are the powerful legal tool for water conservation in Ecuador. With the right support, I think, and the stronger governance and continued collaboration, they can become a key pillar for security water for both people and nature now, and I think into the future. And thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to take any question that if you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle, for that presentation. We are almost coming to the end of the presentation so that we can answer all your questions live. So if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A. The speakers continues to answer them. And also, if you would like to see the speakers' bios, please visit the resources button, where you can be able to see all the speakers. So now it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker, Takalani Marulana, who is our government relations and policy advisor from South Africa. And Takalani will be sharing some of the aspects of policy that the South Africa is using for their strategic water source areas. Takarani, you're welcome. I'll be sharing my screen in a minute.
Thank you, Florence. Greetings to everyone. While you're still looking for my slides, like Florence said, I'm Government Relation and Policy Advisor for TNC in South Africa. So my main role is just to be a liaison between TNC South Africa and different partners, but mainly government relations, government department, and one of the key government departments, department that deal with forestry, the one that deal with water, and so on. I also support government in development of their policy through technical support and other things. And previously, I've worked in the Department of Water and Sanitation in the International Water Corporation. Thanks. Yeah, I see the slide is here now. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Florence. I'll mainly focus on what we call a strategic water source area, and then these are very critical for South Africa. Those who know the map of the country, you realize that this is how it looks. And then when you see the blue side and the light blue, so these are groundwater strategic water source area, and the darker blue, little darker, it's surface strategic water source area, and the combined, which is darker blue, is combined of both the surface and ground strategic water source area. And why are they important to us? If you look at them, you realize that they are just look like patches there and there on the whole map. So they only cover about 10% of the land of the area in South Africa. But why they're important is because they supply about 50% of the water in the country. So that's how critical they are, and even though they are small. And if you can look at the map, you see that most of them, they are around the coastal area. Those who know South Africa, they know on the east side, go to the south, and some part of the west, it's all the coast. So they are around the coast, but they are able to supply as far as where you see somewhere in the central where say Tshwane and Johannesburg. So these are the central, so they're able to supply water there. So that's how important they are. Yeah, and the next slide, I don't know what happened, Florence. So, but this is how they are. So even though they are important, how important they are, I just want to look at some of the threats that the strategic water source area have, and those are the things that need to require intervention, policy intervention that we have looked at as a TNC, but TNC supporting government. The first one is invasive alien species, which takes a lot of water from them, and so we have already put in policy to support government in how to remove them. And the other one is degradation of wetlands, and there's a lot of degradation of wetlands that are happening around the country. So we're working around to get policy to manage them. And there's also issue around climate change. We know climate change is affecting our water system. In some area that we normally know that they have water, there's no water, and some of them they're over. There's more water than it is to be. And then the other one is another threat is over abstraction that we know that is beyond. I mean, government are also trying to manage this through the licensing and so on, but it's still happening there. And some of the threats happen through economic growth, there's development, but be construction, mining, and so on. They also threat to these critically important strategic water source areas. And also there's issue around unsustainable use. There's just people that if we leave it going, there's just unsustainable use that continue to use high water, and others include loss of water where there's a lot of leakages. Those in South Africa, they know that I think it was a few years ago, the government introduced war on leaks. They're trying to deal with the spillage and so on. And also, I mean, that's something that we cannot avoid. It's the issue of population growth that is happening. So it is something that we cannot avoid, but you need to manage vis-a-vis the population growth and unsustainable use. Thank you. Next slide, Florence. Yes. So one of the threat is also the forest exit land, forest exit areas. So this the pictures you can see here. It's also forestry areas. So what I can say about what are they? The forestry exit area is these are the area where government decided about 20 years ago to say in many parts of the country, including Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and some area in Mpumalanga, that the forestry plantation are not become profitable, and then it's time for them to be stopped and use land for other good purposes. So we have seen as TNC to support this policy of government to say we can at least support 400,000 hectares and then to be moved for conservation, and especially around the watershed that are part of this strategic water source area, so that we can able to manage and conserve the strategic water source area. And then why are they? Where the problem is that we found that because government want to move out of this, and one of the things that happened is that it end up there's been poor management around this area, which lead to pollution in our watershed on the watershed, and also illegal activities that because people start doing dumping things there because it's not properly managed. And also we found that there's a study which has been done that this forest area also takes a lot of water. They consume a lot of water compared to other things. So if we can able to manage it and conserve the area around it, it will help a lot. Some of the action that we are supporting in this area as part of the policy is that we want to this forest area to be decommissioned, and then so that when it's decommissioned, it can be properly managed, and then as a conservation. By properly managed, we might look at the three things. One of them is be moved for conservation, and then other area be restoration of the area and also rehabilitation. And another option might be community conservation that we were looking at to support. We are all working with different communities to support government in this area so that they can have a forestry community conservation in this area. They can also support conservation of watershed around this strategic water access area. Next slide, Florence. Thank you. So our policy in the country, we're supporting, when we're supporting government, this, if you remember this GPF target, is that we want to support 1.5 million hectares to be protected and be conserved so that it can also support the strategic water source area. And then some of them that have been transferred, like I was talking about forestry, is that we want them to be improved management. These are like 3 million hectares. This is our target that we want to see as a vision in TNC supporting the government of South Africa. Thanks. Next slide. So this is basically the mechanism which has been designed by government that we are supporting. So this was designed by government in support. TNC was part of the supporting stakeholders, but that designed by DFFE, which is Department of Forestry, Department of Water and Sanitation, WRC, which is the Research Commission, and also CSIR. So also TNC was supporting. So one of the main thing, if you look at it, is that if you look at the base here, you look at this issue around the policy, the governance and partnership. and also finance. This way we have identified that we on the policy side we support, but also on the enabling part, and also in the implementation mechanism, which talks about restoration. So we also support it as TNC. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So what are the, from TNC, what are the main, so there are other things that we have identified to support government. So if you remember on the previous slide, one of the things was finance. So one of the issue that is lacking is that there's not enough fund to support the conservation of strategic water source area. So we are engaging with government to support them on how we can use a water resource management charge to support sustainable finance, so that we can blend finance with other things, but also if we can get this water resource management charge to support the conservation around strategic water source, that would be very great. And then we are still working with government on it. And then the second one, I think this is the one that I've spoken at length about, the transfer of unmanaged forest exit to conservation, that we need them to be moved properly. And then the third one is the alignment between, so we found that the issue of governance around the strategic water, there's different government department and different role players, including TNCS, NGO, and other NGOs, that we have a lot of players. There's no clear coordination. So one of the policy proposal that we're proposing to government is to have a clear corporate governance between different government departments. I mean, there are about 4 government departments. That is, one is about the one that deals with environment, the one that deals with water, the one that deals with agriculture, and also one that deals with the land affairs. So there are about 4 government departments. That will also include the provincial government in between, and also other agencies that will be getting involved, and the catchment. So those are different areas. And then so our role as TNC, we're proposing a policy to have a clear mandate. Who needs to deal what, who need to deal with the overall management, who need to deal with the shared water costs, and also those corporate governance, so that the team can work together. So we are working on pushing the policy for those corporate governance. And the last one is NB sub review. So the NB sub review, it's National Biodiversity Strategic Action and Plan. So this is the main policy that government can put on the issue around the biodiversity and environment. So what we found is that in the past, the issue of water has not been clearly targeted or clearly articulated there. It's not been seen there properly. So we are working with government to make sure that there's a clear target on how we're going to conserve water, and also the strategic water source area. So these are the main 4 that we're living on. I think this should be the last slide. Next slide. Oh yes, yeah. Thank you. I think that's it in short from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Takalani. We now move to the next session, which is answering any questions that have not been answered live. So we have a few questions still pending on the Q&A button, and I would like to request all my speakers to join us on the main webinar from backstage. Thank you. So we apologize we could not have the last presentation, which was a TALIF presentation from Eldoret in Kenya. However, we'll be able to share those slides after. The presenter could not make it today. So on the question, we have a question for Celine. See, no, this is not a question. It's more like provide a contact information. Celine will be able to respond to that. For Takalani, thanks for the presentation. There are 3 questions tied. Are you working with local or national government to implement the resource charge? And the second one is, are you working in a specific region or at national level? And the third question is, how close are you to implementing such a charge?
Thanks. Thanks, Guy. First question, are you working? So we are working with the national government. So the national government is the regulator, but the implementer of the water resource charge is going to be the catchment. So we're working at both, but because this thing has not been implemented, so we are starting with the working with the national government on that one. But we are also engaging the catchment that are already established now. The second question, are you working in specific region? As in South Africa, we're working national, but currently we have a few regions that we're working on. We are in Western Cape, Eastern Cape. Maybe let me be specific. We are in Western Cape, the whole of Western Cape, and Eastern Cape, we are around Ado. And then we are in Limpopo around the Waterberg, and in Mpumalanga around K2C. So those are the regions, but we work national. So currently that's where we are. We're specifically working on it. And on how close are we to the implementation of such charge is that our engagement with government, they made the provision that they are going to start the implementation of this charge beginning of March, which is the next financial year. Sorry, April is the next financial year. That will be 2026, 1 April. Thanks.
Thank you, Takalani. There's a question, I think, this we can go around from Helen on if any of the watershed investment programs that TNC and partners have been implementing has influenced any specific policies. I would queue it for Claudio and Nancy, and the others can also chip in.
After you, Nancy.
Sure. So the question is, have any watershed investment programs influenced specific policies? And I think that there are programs that are working to influence policies, and the main policy that a investment program would work on is a tariff policy to try and work to create sustainable funding for both that program and other programs that are similar. So I'm going to try not to misspeak here, but there are tariff policies in Brazil and Ecuador and working in Colombia, I think too. Did you say, please chime in if I've got those countries incorrectly. But that would be kind of the local level policy. And then we have partners like Takalani and Gise and Claudia working in at the country level to kind of create policies that are more enabling for watershed investment programs in general.
Yeah, I would also add to Ellen, when we first started to talk about payments for environmental services here in Brazil, this 15 years plus back, this concept of having water tariffs being invested in this, it did not exist. So it has been a long time work convincing regulators, convincing other stakeholders in the water and sanitation sector to have these cases in place today. So it has been really influential. I know for our ambition, it has a long way to go. I would emphasize that the water and sanitation sector is mostly dominated by an engineering mindset. So talking about nature-based solutions, talking about recharge groundwater in watersheds and how this could benefit a water treatment plant, sometimes it's very hard to make ourselves understood. So it's a big challenge. Another case that I think Nancy mentioned, the Quito Water Fund. I think it's the most successful because it actually built a fiduciary fund, a revolving fund that, well, I think it's the most successful case. So it's FONAG, F-A, I'll put it on the chat. This is a very good case to look for. And if I can keep with the word, Ellen also asks about how research can respond to real challenge. Ellen, I would invite you to check this, the Invisible Reservoir report that we have created for the São Paulo state in Brazil. In this case, we have gone really deep on the watershed monitoring to try to highlight how much in terms of water quantity investing in nature-based solutions would result. And we have not been successful yet in convincing São Paulo State. It's been challenging, but based on this very strong science support, we believe we can still persist on it. Wrap here.
Thank you, Claudio. We'll take one more question from Enoch, who is saying, given the critical role of watershed conservation in sustaining ecosystem services, how can policymakers incentivize greater investments, particularly in regions where government have historically neglected these efforts? And a second question to that is, how can private sector as a key beneficiary of the services contribute to these efforts? I don't know whether anyone Celine Giselle would like to take that first. Celine?
I can talk a little bit about that. In the question about how to get bigger investments in programs, that's something that we're really working on. We're working simultaneously on what larger regional water conservation programs would look like. We're looking at whether and how we can embed environmental co-benefits into projects into those programs, and we're really thinking about how to fund it. I don't have a clear answer in the Colorado River Basin because this is exactly the question that we're grappling with right now. And so maybe I'll come back in a couple of years and share what we've been able to do. On this particular project, we've had an integrated funding approach where we've brought in state, federal, and private dollars all leveraged against each other. So I think that that's a good demonstration about sort of what might be possible at larger scales. And I will say that we saw really historic levels of investments from the state of New Mexico. We had not seen that level of investment in nature-based solutions or environmental projects in this part of the state before. So sometimes a really good project can start to catalyze legislatures and policymakers into funding programs. I do want to talk a little bit about the role of private and even corporate funding in the project. We do have corporate funding embedded in the project. It's volumetric benefit corporate money. So we sort of evaluate how much water benefit goes when corporations are investing in the project. And I would say a couple of things that I've learned is that private investment in the project at the early stages of project development is very, very critical. It's hard to get public funding into projects at the sort of design phase. So for us, it was critically important to have access to private funding at the beginning. And then we've been talking with our corporate partners about sort of the ways that they can invest in different parts of the project. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for both corporations and the private sectors to help sort of leverage and catalyze funding so that when we can bring in larger pots of state and federal funding to really ramp up the project, we see a really high leveraging of the investments that corporations or private funders have made early on in the project. And then as we've gotten into implementation, some of the private funding has been important to sort of fill gaps on the project. There are things that can come up unexpectedly. And so having really nimble investments from private donors or corporations has been really critical to the success of the project.
Amazing. Thank you, Celine. I see we are at the top of the hour. Giselle, did you have anything to add? Giselle, did you have anything to add? Okay, amazing. So since we are at the top of the hour, I see there are more questions that we haven't responded to. So I'll be sharing these questions with the speakers and they can respond in writing. And after that, I'll be able to share them with you together with the presentations from today's webinar, as well as the recording for the webinar. So just to mention, there is the launch of the report that Nancy mentioned that will be coming out mid-July, and there is also a webinar on June 10th. I'll be including that as well on the State of Water Investment report. So keep an eye on your mailbox as more resources will be coming. And thank you to all of you for joining us and all the speakers for the great presentations and the lessons that you have been able to share with us today. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon, evening, all day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.